Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brooke Williams, Marketing and Member Support Manager at Frontline Selling. We would like to welcome you to today's CEO webinar, What If You Could Tell Your Story to More People? I'm excited to introduce our presenter and Frontline Selling CEO, Mike Scher. Mike is instrumental in coaching thousands of sales executives at becoming better at getting more first appointments. And here at Frontline Selling, we help our clients get more first appointments with people who are genuinely interested in talking to them so they can sell more. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for replay. As we go along today, if you have any questions for Mike, please chat them into your webinar panel on the right side of your screen at any time, and we'll answer as many of them as we can at the end. So thanks for joining, and with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike, and we can get started.
Thank you, Brooke. I appreciate that introduction, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to attend this webinar. And this is all about, for the next 30 or 40 minutes, we're going to talk about how can you tell your story more often to the right people. The secret and the key to selling more is getting that opportunity to tell your story. You guys all have a great story to tell. You wouldn't be in business if you weren't, if you didn't have that great story to tell. And a lot of times what we see is that we just don't get enough opportunities to tell that story to the right person, someone who's genuinely interested in hearing it, and someone who genuinely has the business issues and pains and the challenges and opportunities that your solution uniquely or routinely and perhaps uniquely solves, whether they consciously acknowledge it or not. And getting the opportunity, if you could tell that story, if you could have that audience with that C-level, that VP-level executive and do that more often, that's going to do a great service in terms of getting way more first conversations. My name is Mike Scher. As Brooke mentioned, I'm the president and CEO and one of the co-founders here at Frontline Selling. And at Frontline Selling, our business is helping salespeople get more of those first opportunities to tell their story. In fact, we've developed a methodology and a technology on how to go about doing that. And we're going to share today some of the key components and some of the best practices that we've learned by doing this for nearly 13 years and studying 1.8 million outreach repetitions to determine and figure out what are the best practices of not only who you should reach out to get that audience with, how you should reach out to them. Should you call them? Should you email them? What specifically, precisely should you say in those calls, those emails, those voicemails, etc.? Even frequency, interval of follow-up. So when you do all those things, the result is get more of those first sales appointments or meaningful business conversations with the right people. And like I said, we're going to give you a couple things that you can take back to your own businesses before the end of this session and put in place right away. And these are little things that would create a big impact. And as we go through this discussion and presentation, to give you some perspective and some some mindset, I'm a recovering enterprise software and technology sales guy. So prior to starting Frontline Selling, I spent 18 years selling enterprise software, and in some cases I was selling for a well-known company. In other cases, I was selling for companies that maybe weren't so well-known, and so it was a little bit more difficult to get people's attention. And over the years, discovered that it's not so much the magic of the value proposition, but it's how you communicate and how you represent yourself when you're doing that prospecting. And then bringing it down to a predictable, teachable, and repeatable process is how not only individuals can become better at it, but more importantly, organizations can dramatically move up and to the right. So when we talk about this and what's the secret to telling your story, I want to share with you an image here, which is the London tube station or London subway station. And if anybody's been there, I get an opportunity to travel around the world, and one of my favorite cities is London. And anybody who's ever traveled to London has undoubtedly seen or heard the term and the signage around Mind the Gap. And the first time I went to London, I was just sort of fascinated by it. But then as I've been back there a couple times, I thought about it and I said, well, what is this whole idea around Mind the Gap? Why do they spend so much time talking about this little gap between the platform and the subway train? Because there's signs on the platform, there's signs inside the train, there's even an audio that happens every time the train comes into the station with a British lady asking you to please mind the gap, and there's even T-shirts made about it. And I got to thinking, and I said, why, as you're going through and this small little gap, why would they spend so much time and energy and effort talking about or making people aware of this gap, which I thought was just so obvious? Of course you're going to step over the gap. Of course, you don't want to fall in there. It's just way too obvious to everybody there. And so I said, well, maybe and then I saw some news reports, and I guess it's not that obvious. I guess some people, don't pay attention to that gap, and they get caught in between the train and the platform. Matter of fact, this is an example of one that happened. Everybody's kind of standing around looking at this guy, trying to, figure out, how are we going to get this guy out of here. But the other one was, there was a story just about a month ago about a girl who got her foot caught in the gap, and the train was leaving the station, and there was, all the other travelers that were around there, did everything they could, and they saved her, which was sort of miraculous. But this really got me to thinking. So evidently there's a problem here, right? That people do get caught there, and it becomes catastrophic. And maybe the gap, maybe it's so obvious that the gap, as we're going through our day-to-day, it's so obvious that it becomes invisible. And as I got to thinking about it as it relates to prospecting, prospecting is one of those activities that I think if we look at it and we examine how we do it, and we examine how our teams do it, and we examine, that it's probably something that, by and large, people don't enjoy a lot of success with. But on the other side, if you ask them what you need to do to be successful, the people, that you ask those same people, there's no shortage of confidence when they, in their guesswork in terms of what they need to be successful. People are so certain about what they need to do to become successful at prospecting, yet why are so many people not that good at it? Well, maybe it's in the same case of, minding the gap. Maybe the answer is obvious, but is so obvious that people tend to miss it. So we look at it and we say, well, how can we go ahead and, miss that gap? But how can we not get more opportunities to tell our story? And so when you think about it, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So if you look at yourself or your organization, are you effective at prospecting as you want to be? Well, obviously, if yes, then yeah, keep doing what you're doing. But if you're not as effective and you want to be more effective, then you're going to have to make a change. And when we look at what changes people make, the playbook is pretty thin. The first thing they go and they say, well, I need better data. I need to build or buy or steal a better list. Well, that's really not a change, because that's probably one of the things you've been doing. And then the other place they look at and say, well, we need to change the message. Well, you've been changing the message, and what seems to work one time doesn't work the next. And so that means that maybe we really don't know what works at all. And so when we look at this and we say, well, if you want to do something different, there's an obvious place you and your team can look in order to become more effective at prospecting, and optimize the prospecting. The definition and everything we're talking about is exactly where the concept of prospecting optimization comes into play. Prospecting optimization, how can we turn more of our leads into first appointments? How can we penetrate more of those ideal client profile target accounts? Because after all, if it's going to take you 5 or 10 or 12 or 15 meetings and demonstrations and conference calls and negotiation sessions or whatever to sell a deal, you can't do the 15th until you do the 14th. You can't do the 14th until you do the 13th. And you can't do any of them until you do the first one. The key to selling more is having more first conversations with the right people who are genuinely interested in talking to you. So, and that again is the definition of, is where prospecting optimization comes into play. And the definition is making your prospecting efforts as fully perfect, functional, or as effective as possible. What if you could, and what if your sales team knew exactly what was going to happen on the other end of the phone or the other end of a prospecting email? What if they could predict exactly what was going to happen every single time and took the entire mystery out of it? What if you could not only predict it and you knew exactly who you should contact, what you should say, how you should say it, even the frequency and interval of follow-up? What if you could teach that process to anybody, regardless of their domain expertise or even their experience level? Somebody just out of college, for example. And then finally, what if you could teach that, if you could repeat that process, not only from an individual perspective and organizationally? Well, you can, and that's one of the things that we do here at Frontline is help organizations do that. You can by following some very, very simple steps. And the secret to turning more leads into first appointments could be found just on, is the same secret that you find in diet and exercise. Diet and exercise, when you're doing your exercises, what matters more? How many push-ups you do, or how many sit-ups you do, or how well you do each one of them? Well, the answer, of course, is how well you do each one of them. And no matter what activity it is, if it's a sporting activity, everything where the effectiveness is all based on form matters. So you're much better off doing 10 really good push-ups than 30 really bad ones. Form matters, everything from bowling to golf to tennis to ballet to horseback riding. There's technique involved, and technique wins over talent almost every single time. So prospecting is really the sort of the calisthenics of selling. And so, if we could break our prospecting activities down into individual calisthenics and execute each one with perfect form, we can create dramatic outcomes. And as an example as to what I mean by that is, think about that precision and consistency. The margin between being good and great at anything, whether it's prospecting or golf, for example, the margin is very, very small. And one example is, if you look at the PGA Tour today and you look at anybody in the top 10, you don't even have to take the top golfer, but a top 10 golfer, and you look at their stroke average, and you take somebody like a Sergio Garcia or somebody like that, a top 10 golfer, and you look at their stroke average, and then you take the 100th ranked golfer, and you look at their stroke average per 18 holes. The difference between the top 10 golfer and the number 100 golfer, the difference in stroke is less than 1 stroke per 18 holes. So that just means that the top 10 golfer in the world makes a 3-foot putt where the other guy misses it, makes a 6-foot putt where the other guy misses it. Maybe he hits the ball that much closer to the pin from the fairway, so he has a chance to make that putt where the other guy one shot around doesn't. And that happens less than 1 stroke. So the margin between good and great is very thin. But the reward between good and great is very large. So the earnings of a top 10 golfer averages about $5 or $6 million in 2014. The 100th golfer on the PGA Tour, who didn't even, not even one stroke per 18 holes, only makes about $700,000, $800,000. Well, that's a lot of money, but compared to the $5 million. But the fact of the matter is that the difference is between that just one stroke every 18 holes, just doing that swing that much more precise, making those putts that much more consistent. Maybe it's just the way they grip the club. The difference in doing that with a greater level of precision and a greater level of consistency results in 8x the earnings of the 100th golfer. And then you have the difference between the 100th golfer and the 126th golfer. The difference in there is a fraction of a stroke, maybe not even 1/10 of one stroke per 18 holes. But the guy who comes in 126th on the PGA Tour doesn't get his PGA card for the next year. He can't even compete. So the margin between good and great is so slim that the detail, the level of precision in all the activities, and you can, if you're not a golf fan, you can apply this same principle to a baseball player, to a ballerina, to a dancer, to an equestrian rider, to any sort of activity, that the difference between somebody who's really good and someone who's great is just the level of precision and discipline and consistency that they have. So if we take that same concept, and what I want to do is start sharing some of that where form matters as it relates to every aspect of doing your prospecting exercises for you and your team. And that form could be in every calisthenic or every exercise they do. It could be leaving a voicemail, just like there's a right way to do a push-up, a sit-up, and a jumping jack. There's a right way and every other way to leave a voicemail. That's going to statistically yield the highest results. So knowing what to do is not really the problem. That's pretty easy. But getting folks to do it and do it every single time, that's where the magic happens. So there's how you ask for email addresses, the circumstances by which you send emails, the way you address an administrative assistant. Everything relates to form, and there's a right way to do it, and there's every other way. So what I'm going to do is I want to share with you, not only share, but then demonstrate for you a concept of one prospecting scenario that your team probably faces every single day. Something as simple as, you call somebody, you're calling an executive, and you get the dreaded evil gatekeeper, right? And that's something that I know a lot of reps try to avoid, like the plague. But the fact is that the quote-unquote evil gatekeeper can be your greatest ally. And so after, studying all these scenarios and doing this 1.8 million times, an example of one of those perfect calisthenics, perfect, prospecting exercises is how you deal with that administrative assistant. And I'll show you what the impact is, what the impact could be of that. So at a high level, what you want to do is, and this seems very easy, and I'm sure you're going to say, hey, my guys do this. This looks pretty simple. I'm going to show you where sort of the precision kind of comes into play in a second. But it's really to identify yourself and your company. So whenever you're dealing with an administrative assistant, there's 5 things you need to do to do it effectively. And then how you execute this and the level of precision and detail makes a big difference between being that top money winner on the PGA Tour or not getting your PGA card. So you want to identify yourself and your company. That sounds easy enough. Ask for the administrative assistant's name. Ask for help. State the purpose of your call. You want to set up a meeting or conference call or whatever it is, and then ask a question on how to accomplish that. Now, that seems pretty easy, but how you go about doing those things makes a difference. Let me give you an example. So here is a scenario where just talking about, how you execute what I just put together, what that might look like. So you might call in and say, hi, this is Mark Johnson. Is Mr. CEO available? The admin says, what company are you with? I'm with Allied Metals. Okay, let me see if he's available. Great, thanks. Okay, that might be one of the ways where, how it might manifest itself. Now, if you look at this and you say, well, hey, I identified myself and I told them what company I was with, and and I did those things, it seems sort of benign, and yeah, that's probably a good way of doing it. But that's what typical average sales guys do. The ones who really fine-tune their craft want to go in and really, get into a little bit more detail. And so transforming a conversation like this, which sounds pretty benign, and then moving it to this conversation, and we'll walk into why this conversation is much more effective. Hi, this is Mark Johnson with Allied Metals, and your name is? This is Sally. Hi, Sally. I was wondering if you could help me. Sure, I'll try. Okay. I wanted to talk to Mr. CEO about how your company can save 200% in metal costs, blah, 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 whatever it is. Can you tell me the best way to go about doing that? I'll see if Mr. CEO can take your call. Perfect. Thanks, Sally. So the idea here is just we did all the same things. We just did them in a little bit different order and frequency. So, for example, why is this important? Where in the first scenario, we didn't identify ourselves in our company, right? Why is this really important? Well, what's really important is that when you call into the administrative assistant, for example, that administrative assistant gets a lot of calls, and they are naturally suspicious about who's calling. So what we find is that sales reps don't want to give out a lot of information because they're afraid of getting disqualified. And what ultimately happens is they try to circumvent the administrative assistant, or what they call the gatekeeper, and they actually end up getting the response they fear the most. But if you look at it from put yourself in their position, they're naturally suspicious about people calling, just like we're always naturally suspicious about someone, ringing our phone or knocking on our door. So rather than, the best way to lower that suspicion and to do that with perfect form is to really just identify yourself and your company name. Hi, this is Mark Johnson from Allied Metals. And then you engage them just by simply asking their name, because everybody's favorite subject is themselves, and that's always epitomized by their name. So you lower just by doing something a little bit differently, you begin to lower this suspicion, and you start gaining in literally 2 seconds, you start gaining a level of trust that's greater than in the former scenario. And then the second thing you do is you say, hey, Sally, I was wondering if you could help me. So by repeating the name, you're creating a personal connection, and by asking if you can help them, that is really important. And the reason why that's really important is because they were doing something the instant before the phone rang. And just like you're doing something the instant before the phone rang, you want to get the administrative assistant, in this case, to stop doing what they're doing and to focus on you. The best way to do that is by asking a question. I was wondering if you can help me. Okay, sure, I'll try. Okay, and then you go into the purpose of your call, and the best thing to do is and then as long as you end with asking a question on the best way to accomplish it, then you maintain control of that call every single time. And if you see in this particular example, the administrative assistant may or may not ultimately get Mr. CEO on the line, but she's taking a much more proactive stance in our capacity. So that is an example of doing something as simple as interacting with an administrative assistant by doing it where in the first scenario is not lowering that suspicion and not engaging the person, versus the second scenario, which takes no more time and no more effort, just doing essentially saying the same types of words but formulating them a little bit differently, and then being much more effective in your communication. And when you do this way, the result is dramatic. Just like when you hit the golf ball to a greater level of precision and you do it every single time, you get that extra stroke per 18 holes. You get to make the extra $5 or $6 million. The same thing happens with prospecting. When you do these sorts of things to this level of precision, the results are dramatic. And there's tons of examples, right? If you think about it, if you're taking a trip to the moon and you're off by, 1/100th of a degree, by the time you get to the moon, you're going to miss it altogether. So that's how these small little things can magnify if done wrong. But if they're done correctly, that's the difference between, being in the top tier and getting that first appointment more often, not just 5 or 10% more often, 2, 3, 400% more often, versus doing it the other way. And that's just one example of some of those calisthenics. So I'll give you one more, and then what I'd like to do is, I'm sure there's some questions. I see there's some questions coming in. I wanted to give you one more and idea that's a pretty simple one, but also one that most people often overlook. So, for example, by studying this prospecting and optimization for the past 12 years and looking at how the outreach is done and everything from how you ask questions, the order in which you do things, the frequency, the interval, etc. Something as simple as the circumstances by which you send an email make a difference in the responses you get to those emails, statistically. And what I mean by that is that if I just send out a bunch of emails, I'm going to get a very, very low response. But if I get permission to send an email from the admin or Sally or the key player or whatever, if I ask permission to send that email and they receive it, what happens is that the response rate and the read rates on those emails go up dramatically just by putting a little bit extra effort in it. So, for example, if I might call somebody and leave them a voicemail, or let's say I call somebody and I speak to them, and then I just send an email because I feel like sending it. Beyond that, the chances of that email getting read are very low, so why bother sending it? But if you want to dramatically increase that, let's say I'm talking to Sally, the admin, and now Mr. CEO is not there. If I said to him or said to Sally, well, what's his email address? She may or may not give it to me. But if I say it in a way that is assumptive, and I do it every single time, again, amazing things happen. And some of those amazing things are way more emails get read, but more importantly, way more emails get responded to or forwarded within the organization, which is what we all want. So an example of how to ask for permission is, would it be best if I sent a couple of quick paragraphs to you or to your CEO, and this way he can see the topics we're looking to discuss? I actually have his email as j.jones@xyz.ask.com. So asking for an email assumptively, you'll get a response positively way more often versus just saying, can I send an email? And then because you're giving the impression that you're not that familiar with the company. So again, another example of one of those prospecting calisthenics that really, are little things. They're not hard to do. And that's the beauty of this stuff. All these little things, you just need to know how to do them, the right way, and just do them every single time. And when you do those, you become the guy who plays on Sunday afternoon, the Rory McIlroys, the Sergio Garcias, the Tiger Woods, etc., and not the golfer who's sort of toiling, just trying to make ends meet on, just to keep their PGA card. And that becomes the difference. And the difference between those two guys is just their attention to detail and precision and doing things consistently. So if you pay attention to form, and I gave you a couple of examples on how to do that, you pay attention on how you do things and how you interact and the circumstances, you'll close that gap, and you won't fall into that gap between the train and the platform. Form matters. Use it. Always use your best form. So if you're not quite sure what your sales team is doing, how to, how they're executing, and you would like a free assessment of your team, let us know. We'd be happy to schedule time and do that assessment. We'll actually either take an audio file of your guys prospecting and analyze it. We only need, not that much time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes time. Or we can listen in on some of their prospecting calls, and we'll give you an assessment and say, here's what they're doing right. Here's what they're doing wrong. Here's how you can close the gap. If that's something that you're interested in, just you can reach out to either the number here, the 678-638-7345 number, or just call me directly, and or if you want to talk about optimizing your prospecting, selling more, please let me know, and I'd be happy to have that conversation. So with that, what I'd like to do is sort of open up the phone lines here. And Brooke, if I see that there's a few questions here, maybe you can moderate those.
Yes, absolutely, Mike. We've got an excellent question that came in around objection handling, and the question has been asked: what if the admin comes back after talking to Mr. CEO and says, "I'm sorry, but Mr. CEO is happy with our current provider and is not interested at this time"?
Well, that's a great question. Now, it really depends on the organization, right? If you're selling into the enterprise market, right, or even any sort of mid-size or large company. I mean, I'm a CEO of a small company here, and I really don't know all the things that are going on, right? Sometimes I might just get, hey, yeah, whatever it is, we're doing fine. You really got to think that the CEO, doesn't have that sort of detailed knowledge of all the things that are going on within the organization. So if it's a mid or large size organization, what I would do is I would just say, okay, what I would try to do is I try to get a piece of collateral, especially email collateral, in the CEO's hands. I'd say, okay, Sally, I appreciate that. I do, just for future reference, I would like to, send an email to, MrCEO.com, and then this way he could see some of the topics, because a lot of times we're dealing with our, everybody's got a provider they're happy with, and that's fine. And but if the opportunity comes up, then this way he can forward it on to the appropriate person. And Sally, shall I copy you at sally.jones@xyz.com? And so that's one of the ways. Then what I would do is, I'd say, I understand that you're real happy, but in addition to the CEO, there's usually a line of business that you typically, typically deal with. We usually talk to somebody in the IT group who's really got, and if they have a current provider, we can certainly augment or add value to that. I would then try to go to Sally and try to get a referral to that particular line of business executive. Now, having said that, and having done this 1.8 million times, I could probably count on one hand, especially in the mid and larger markets, where the CEO has said, hey, everything's great here, we're working real well. It usually does. I mean, it just does. I know it could happen. In reality, it just doesn't happen very often.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Next question. Wow, they're pouring in, so let's move through some more of these. Next question. Everyone on our team uses their own messaging, just whatever seems to work for them. How can I get them all on the same page?
Oh, no, that's a great question, Brooke. The messaging, that's we focus on helping our clients. It's not so much the uniqueness of the message, but it's how it's delivered. So it's really the process and the efficacy by which they deliver the message. The whole idea of, the message can be a little bit different from person to person. But if you don't deliver that message, whatever that message is, because it doesn't matter whether you're selling disaster recovery services, consulting, supply chain optimization, healthcare management, all those people have different messages. And we represent and work with clients across a whole series of spectrum. The issue isn't so much the consistency of the message, it's the consistency and frequency on how they deliver it. So if they're showing up and talking about us and we and this in their message, then that's going to turn off the recipient of that message. But if they deliver it sort of like what we talked about in a couple of examples here, if they deliver that message where to a person where they've lowered the suspicion, for example, they've gotten their attention, and they delivered that consistent message, that concise message, and they maintain control by asking a question on how to accomplish it. That structure around how the message is delivered is more important than the message itself in terms of getting it resonated. So I would look closely at I'm all for people having some individuality, and that's fine. But there is a best practice on how to deliver that message, and that's what I would focus on.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Next question. This is a great one. Do you have any approaches for more email-based prospecting business versus cold calling?
Well, when you look at the data and the study, the fact of the matter is that it's not one or the other. It's actually, it's all inclusive. And, most people, the reason is that, is that you really need to use a very specifically defined multi-touch point approach. And the reason is that people consume messages differently. Some people are more email-centric. But if they're like me, I get 300 or 400 emails a day. So to just send me emails, it just makes it 301 or 401, and it just gets sort of lost in the ether. So some people are email-centric. Some people are audio learners, so the fact that you make the phone call and they're either relationship people or they're audio learners, and voicemail would be more important to them. Some people, this is why you always want to leave a voicemail. You always want to get permission to send that email so it gets noticed, because we get a lot of email. It's also, you always want to engage the administrative assistant, because some people give their administrative assistants more domain over their calendars and their activities. And so when you call somebody, you do some outreach to somebody, you don't know what their communication DNA preferences are, for example. You don't know if they're a voicemail. But if you call somebody and leave them a voicemail, speak to their admin, and send them an email or send them their admin an email, and they respond to you through their admin, they're telling you by their behavior the best way that they like to communicate. So what's really important, it's not one or the other, it's a combination. And then let me just add another point to that, is that the messaging needs to be consistent between those different communication protocols. That the voicemail and the email and the admin conversation, any referral, other key players you talk to, the messaging that you deliver, while it could be different, while my message might be a little different than yours, Brooke, my message and my outreach effort to a particular company, that messaging needs to be the same, because it's that repetition of the message that's going to contribute most to getting you noticed. As a matter of fact, it's the same reason why McDonald's and Nike repeat their tagline over and over again. That's how they become more familiar to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. I know we have time for probably one or two more questions. Next question, how can I get my sales team to track their sales goals, and what tools do you recommend?
Well, naturally, CRM applications and some of those, I know people have a love-hate relationship with their CRM application. They don't like it because of perhaps the way it was set up, and maybe it's too unwielding, and but in reality, you'd be crazy to try to live without it. So, it's that's part of that's a CRM implementation issue. The other part, and I'm going to do a plug for for our solution, is one of the challenges to most every CRM app. It's interesting. Most people, when they're prospecting, believe in a multi-touch point approach, but CRM applications don't do a good job. Don't even do a even a bad job. They don't do any job in terms of providing a true multi-touch point receptacle for people to track that information. So one of the things that we've done in part of our platform is our plugins, CRM plugins to things like Salesforce.com, that actually transform them into true multi-touch point applications. So people drive. The key is documenting, not only doing your best practices consistently, but even documenting things consistently. So anything you can do to drive consistency, and we certainly do with our prospecting application that snaps into Salesforce, that drives, everybody documents something as simple as, I called Brooke, left her a voicemail, I spoke to her admin, and her admin said, go ahead and send me an email. Everybody documents that in precisely the same way. And what that means is you're able to collate that and drive, and coach and measure to that specific goals that you're setting for your team.
Great. And last question, we have a viewer today that's a little bit newer to a sales role, Mike, and he says, how do you know who to ask for?
Well, sometimes you don't, right? It's data's never 100% accurate, but if you're new to a sales role, I'm sure whatever it is you're selling, go to your marketing folks, and they'll give you the personas, the profiles, of the types of people within an organization. So, whether it's the head of marketing or the head of sales or the head of finance or IT or whatever kind of solution you're selling to, you can certainly do that research for that person to ask for them, on things like LinkedIn or whatever. That's the way to discover that. But the key, the fastest, and that's certainly one place you want to go to. But the fastest way to validate that data or find out who the right person is call the CEO, and you'll likely get the CEO or the CEO's admin. And if they don't know if anybody's going to know who the right person is, they're going to know the right place to direct you. And that's the best. And as long as you approach them the right way, as long as you execute that conversation with proper form, you're going to get that response almost every single time. At least that's what our team does. That's what our clients do, because they just follow those best practices.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for your time today. We do want to respect that we did ask for 45 minutes, and we want to stick to that. So a couple of questions that came in, and we haven't had the time to reach out, we will do that via email just following today's session. So we'll make sure we connect with you on those. So Mike, thanks for sharing today this content with us, and we appreciate everyone who took the time out of their day to join. So I'll just let you thank everyone and wrap it up.
Yeah, well, yes, and my pleasure, Brooke, and thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your busy day. I hope you were able to walk away with a couple things that you can put into action right away. And as you see on the screen, if there's any help or any identification of from an assessment standpoint, we'd be happy to take a look at that. Or if you just wanted to talk about selling, call me. That's my cell phone number. I'll be happy to take your call. So appreciate it, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.